Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, learning her fate. The former Minnesota police officer convicted of manslaughter in the death of Dante Wright. Today, we will learn how much time she is likely to spend behind bars. The potential sentence Kim Potter could receive for shooting and killing Wright during a traffic stop. Under oath, a judge has ordered former President Trump and two of his children to answer questions in New York State's civil investigation of the Trump Organization. The information investigators hope to learn. New signs this morning that Russia may be ready to attack Ukraine. Even though Russia has released more video, it says shows its forces leaving the border. President Biden says the threat of an invasion is still very high.
Yes, my sense this will happen in the next several days.
We begin, though, with the sentencing of Kim Potter later this morning. The former Minnesota police officer will learn her fate for killing Dante Wright last year.
Potter was convicted of first and second-degree manslaughter in December for fatally shooting Wright during a traffic stop. Potter said she mistook her handgun for a taser. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now from Minneapolis. Ron, good morning to you. So today's sentencing could go on for more than a couple hours. Take us through the process. What can we expect, and will she speak?
The most poignant part of this, the most dramatic part of this, will be the victim impact statements by Dante Wright's mother and father, and perhaps the mother of his 2-year-old child. They testified during the trial, you may recall, and they were very emotional. And what they, of course, keep emphasizing is that their son is dead. He's gone. He's not coming back. There's no way that they see that they're going to get justice, which would mean him coming back. So they are hoping for accountability. And if you think even further back, the family and rights advocates wanted Potter charged with murder. She was charged with first-degree and second-degree manslaughter. So the maximum sentence in this case is 15 years on the books. But the prosecution in their court filings have asked for 7 years, essentially, which is what the sentencing guidelines for this type of crime suggests. So that's what we expect from that side. From the defense, yes, we may hear from Potter herself. You'll recall she testified during the trial, and she was very emotional, very remorseful. Some observers didn't quite feel a lot of sympathy for her because she's a 26-year police veteran who essentially says that she mistook her weapon for a taser, something that she'd been trained about for many, many years. So we expect to hear perhaps from her and from supporters of hers who we believe have submitted letters to the court talking about how good and decent a person she is. She's a mother, she's married, she has ties to this community, and they are going to, the defense, ask for leniency. They're going to ask probably for more probation time than any prison time. They would probably argue that prison for a police officer is a very dangerous place potentially, and they are going to try and do everything they can, we would think, to keep her out of prison. So, yes, this could go on for some time. You'll recall also that this is the same courtroom where Derek Chauvin was sentenced in the murder of George Floyd some time ago. So there is that as well. The judge has a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of pressure on the judge, on the court system here, to do right by this family.
Ron, does history or precedent give us any indication then of where the judge might go with the sentencing decision?
Again, I think we're in somewhat uncharted waters. Yes, there are all kinds of court precedents, and that's why, again, the prosecution seems to be asking for 7 years, not the full 15 years. And you may remember during the court proceedings, they argue that there are aggravating circumstances that suggested that she should be convicted and sentenced to a even longer term. They have backed away from that argument. It's unclear exactly why. We may hear more of an explanation during the court proceeding. But to some extent, again, this is a very political environment. We know what's been happening in Minneapolis. There was the George Floyd case. Just yesterday, I attended a funeral of Amir Locke, a young man who was shot and killed during this no-knock warrant raid by police just a couple of weeks ago. The trial of the 3 officers who were also charged in George Floyd's death, along with Derek Chauvin. That trial is happening in a federal court in St. Paul, not far from here. So there's a lot going on in this town. The judge, everybody in this is a human being, and they have to be aware of this. And advocates for the family, for Dante Wright's family and advocates across the country want a statement in this sentence, and so they are hoping and pushing for the most serious sentence that they can get.
Ron Allen in Minneapolis. Ron, thank you.
This morning, former President Trump is facing another legal defeat. A judge ruled that he and his children, Ivanka and Donald Jr., must answer questions under oath from New York Attorney General Letitia James. She's leading a civil probe into the Trump Organization for possible financial fraud. Joining us now is NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian and legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Good morning to both of you. And Ken, I will begin with you. So first, just tell us about this ruling from the judge and this very direct statement we have from him on it, and then also what it means for the New York Attorney General's investigation.
Good morning, Savannah. Yeah, this was a resounding defeat for Donald Trump and his children, no question about it. I sat through listened to most of the 2-hour-plus arguments yesterday, and Judge Arthur Bergeron politely listened to the Trump lawyer contention that this was improper, that the AG should not be able to conduct both a civil investigation and a criminal investigation, that she was compromising the Fifth Amendment rights of Donald Trump and his children by trying to compel them to testify. And what the Trump lawyers wanted is for them to stay the civil case while the criminal case unfolded. The judge listened politely, but in his ruling, he just brought the hammer down. I mean, essentially, he said that this investigation had found what he described as copious evidence of fraud. Copious means a lot, and that she had every right to question these defendants under oath, and that they're perfectly free to assert their Fifth Amendment rights and not answer. You know, of course, the Trumps will appeal, but the judge gave them 21 days to sit for a deposition. That may not hold because of the appeal, but a significant ruling, Savannah.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that statement goes on to say copious evidence of possible financial fraud and wants to question under oath several of the entities, principals, including its namesake. She has the clear right to do so. So, Danny, I want to bring you in here and talk about what the president's attorney is saying, the former president's attorney, how they're responding, describing it as another politically motivated witch hunt and saying her client can't get a fair ruling in the state of New York. What legal options do the Trumps have at this point? And does a former president have any special legal protection that then his children maybe wouldn't have under questioning here?
First, in terms of an appeal, they'd essentially be appealing the denial of a stay, and they'd need a stay to appeal that motion for a stay. Not particularly likely, and I think that's why His Honor made this a very short timeline to get everything done. 14 days in which to turn over documents, 21 days in which to appear for depositions. One of the things to think about is in a lot of cases, and I've done this myself, when you have a defendant that may be facing a criminal investigation, as a plaintiff's attorney, you want to wait until the criminal investigation is over because you know that that person will come to a deposition and just take the Fifth Amendment, and you won't get the information that you'd really like to get. But that's not the case here, because for the New York Attorney General, the Trumps taking the Fifth Amendment is a win. That itself is a victory. Now, you asked about any special protections. In reality, other than maybe a stretch of a presidential privilege type argument, which I don't see happening here, no. Once the president leaves office, he's a regular citizen. He can't protect his kids. He can't protect himself, certainly against a state investigation and state subpoena power.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into kind of some of the other investigations going on. So, Ken, we've been talking right now about this civil case, but the Trump Organization's also facing a criminal investigation. Now, that one's being led by the Manhattan District Attorney. Could testimony here in this civil case that we're discussing right now, that this judge has just ordered the Trumps must provide, impact that criminal one?
Well, of course it could, Savannah, and that was the heart of the Trumps' argument for why it shouldn't take place. But as Danny would tell you, it's hard to imagine that Donald Trump or his children will actually answer questions in a civil deposition while they're under criminal investigation. It would be madness to do so. In fact, Eric Trump, one of the sons, did sit for a deposition in October 2020, and he took the Fifth Amendment more than 500 times. And I think that's what we can expect from Donald Trump and his children. The thing is, in the civil case, the judge or the jury can draw an adverse inference from their failure to answer questions, and the standard of proof in the civil case is lower. But you're right, the criminal case is the real ballgame here, and let's not forget what the AG and the Manhattan DA is investigating is financial irregularities. The question of whether the Trump Organization and members of that organization committed fraud fraud, lied to banks and insurance companies. They've already indicted the CFO, Alan Weisselberg, who has pleaded not guilty. And that investigation continues, and it looks like it's fairly perilous for the former president and his children. Savannah.
And Danny, before I let you both go, let's talk about a separate civil case against the Trump Organization. That one's heading to trial later this year about the president's inauguration committee. What should we know about that?
Yeah, it basically is about the misuse of inauguration funds. I don't know the exact date that is coming, that is scheduled for trial, but look for any last-minute delays because the Trump side isn't going to want to go to court on a case like this.
Danny and Ken, with two very similar styles of decorating your live shots. If I need to borrow a peacock pillow, I know who to call. Thank you so much to both of you.
You bet.
As states and cities drop some of their COVID safety protocols, new research is causing concern over the so-called stealth variant. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. So a new study from Japan says this stealth Omicron subvariant could be more harmful than its cousin, Omicron version 1. So what should we know about it? Should we be worried?
So, Joe, we should always worry when we see a variant that can be more infectious than the original Omicron. And this is in animal studies, mind you, as you mentioned, from a Japan pre-peer-reviewed study. So we still have some steps to validate some of that data. But it worries me that we see something more infectious, which we had hints towards. And then there's also the concern that it could evade what we call vaccine-induced immunity or even natural infection-induced immunity. So we've seen that with the original Omicron, that our vaccines get a little less effective, still hold, but a little less. Imagine just even a little less effective with a new variant. Here's the good news. Only about 3.9% of the Omicron sampling in the entire United States is that BA.2 sublineage. But Japan made a recommendation in their paper, which is a reasonable one, that this one, BA.2, is different enough that it deserves its own Greek letter. So we'll see how this unfolds as we're watching it around the country and around the world.
We'll keep an eye on it. Let's talk about Seattle, where the first U.S. case of COVID-19 was confirmed about 2 years ago. The city now going to lift its proof of vaccination requirement for restaurants, theaters, gyms starting March 1st. This is a move that mirrors similar changes we're seeing all around the country. Do you have any worries about lifting these kinds of restrictions right now?
I think my worries about lifting things today in some parts of the country is that the cases have not fallen enough. And the majority of the country is shifting from red or high transmission to kind of moderate. And what we hope to do is wait till we're in that low transmission, according to the CDC. But I think that people are frustrated, so we're all looking for a way out. Here's some flags for concern. You either might be immunocompromised, 12 million people, Joe, who either can't get enough antibodies from vaccines or can't even get the vaccine for medical reasons, or you're under 5, not even eligible. So we really need to now shift and focus to how to make sure they're protected.
Let's talk about folks who are immunocompromised, who are high risk. If you're vaccinated and boosted, what is the best guidance for when and where you should still be wearing a mask? And what will it take? At what point might high-risk Americans be able to return to a more normal life?
Yeah, this is the hardest part of my day job of seeing patients, Joe. Here's my very blunt advice. It's what I give to my patients. First of all, double check and see if you are indeed somebody that should be taking some of these extra precautions. There are patients who clearly know they are, transplant patients, patients undergoing some cancer therapies, patients with certain blood disorders, immune disorders, but some people don't realize they might be susceptible. So talk to your doctor. You can do it virtually if you're nervous about it. Number 2, you should find out if you qualify for what we call a prophylactic monoclonal antibody treatment. What's that? It's a fancy medical way of saying we have monoclonal antibody injections that we can give you in anticipation of you getting infected. You don't need to be infected, but you need to be immunocompromised. It gives you an additional boost to the immunity that you really do need to fight an infection if you get it. And then third, I am telling everyone to wear a high quality mask. And if it's hard for you to do that, I'm okay with you wearing a surgical mask, but still make sure that you're masking and don't try to feel bad or somehow that you did something wrong. This is really to protect yourself.
Helpful advice as always. Dr. Kavita Patel, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. And if you, our viewers, have a question for one of our doctors, let us know. You can email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions. And please let us know if you want to stay anonymous. Let's get a check now on your Morning News Now weather.
Yeah, that includes a brutal winter storm that's threatening more than 100 million Americans as it sweeps across the eastern half of the country. Bill Cairns joins us with the latest on that track. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So many places had so many issues with this storm, and we're still dealing with it. We just watched severe thunderstorms at 6 a.m. in the morning from Philadelphia to New York City. Very rare for February. Let me show you what happened in Illinois. This was the cold side of the storm. This is where you had problems with temperatures crashing after rain. Then you went over to ice. Then you went over to snow. And these are just semi-trucks that are just littering Interstate 39. That's not a pretty scene there, with numerous jackknife tractor trailers and the highway just stuck. So that was kind of the example of the cold side of the storm. We also have a lot of problems with flooding. This map shows you everywhere in maroon or the reddish type color where we have flood warnings. All of western New York, the southern half of Indiana. We have a lot of river flooding that's ongoing. We have a lot of standing water. And now the temperatures are crashing. So now the water's refreezing. So we just got numerous travel issues throughout the Ohio Valley in western New York from all that standing water. And now the cold temperatures moving in. That squall line that did have some severe weather with it yesterday has weakened. Just some rain heading for you in Savannah and Charleston early this morning. It's raining right now in Wilmington. And it looks like we've just cleared it out in areas of the mid-Atlantic. Temperatures are going to crash, though. We're still at 60 degrees in Philadelphia. Look back to the west in Detroit, 12 degrees. That's almost 50 degrees colder in Detroit right now than it is in Philadelphia. So enjoy that early morning warmth in Hartford, Montauk, and Boston. I know it's very windy, too, because that's going to get much colder as we go throughout the day. As far as the wind alerts go, we still have about 78 million people under some sort of wind alerts or high wind warnings. The strongest of the winds are in coastal areas of New England and also right around the Jersey Shore and the Maryland coast. We could expect gusts this morning up to 50 to 60 miles per hour. So if you're driving on those tall bridges, grab the steering wheel with two hands, and we'll have significant delays at the airports this morning in the Northeast. So the forecast, no issues really in the southern half of the country. It's still, though, cold and windy, the Great Lakes, and then we'll see some of those changes in the Northeast today. We'll talk about that weekend forecast coming up, and it looks a lot quieter than what we just got done with.
Good. Hopefully you can have a quiet weekend, Bill.
Exactly. All right, good. We'll look for that next hour.
Thank you.
Be nice.
Thanks, Bill.
Coming up, with the U.S. predicting Russia could be days away from invading Ukraine, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Europe.
She's meeting with world leaders to talk security. What to expect from the VP's highest profile trip yet. Next.
In Ukraine this morning, more accusations of shelling and ceasefire violations are being traded by Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatist rebels. And again overnight, there are reports of mortar attacks in the eastern part of the country.
Yeah, yesterday, President Biden warned the threat of a Russian invasion remains very high and said Moscow is trying to create a pretext for war. He did not provide evidence for those allegations, and Russia called the claims baseless. At a UN meeting yesterday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken described how a possible attack could unfold.
Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for its attack. This could be a violent event that Russia will blame on Ukraine, or an outrageous accusation that Russia will level against the Ukrainian government. We don't know exactly the form it will take. It could be a fabricated so-called terrorist bombing inside Russia, the invented discovery of a mass grave, a staged drone strike against civilians, or a fake, even a real attack using chemical weapons.
Secretary Blinken is part of America's delegation with Vice President Kamala Harris at the Munich Security Conference today. The crisis in Ukraine is expected to top the agenda there.
NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joins us from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and our chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell is in Munich for us this morning. Good morning to the both of you. Thanks for being with us. Aaron, I'll start with you on the ground in Ukraine for us. So we're seeing reports of new flare-ups this morning across that ceasefire line in eastern Ukraine. Again, this existing area with tensions that's now flaring up. What's the latest there? And could this potentially be the type of false flag operation that the president warned about?
Hey, Savannah, well, you're right. Overnight, there were reports of fresh violence in the Donbass region of Ukraine, with the Ukrainian government and the separatists accusing each other of escalating the situation. We heard from the Ukrainian defense minister earlier today accuse the Russian-backed separatists of targeting civilian areas. This after yesterday, a kindergarten was struck by a projectile. The children were evacuated from the school, according to the Ukrainian military, and 3 teachers were injured in that attack. This as the OSCE marked a noticeable uptick yesterday in the violence, recording more than 400 ceasefire violations in Luhansk and more than 180 ceasefire violations in Donetsk. This as Western officials are expressing concern that Russia could try to use this latest escalation as a pretext for a further invasion. And I've been speaking to Ukrainian military experts here in Kyiv, and they are extremely concerned about the possibility for further escalation in the east as well as along the Black Sea. Guys.
Andrea, Secretary Blinken yesterday described the situation as a moment of peril. He's going to be meeting with his Russian counterpart again next week. But before that, he's joining Vice President Harris in Munich, where you are. What kind of message is the American delegation aiming to deliver at this conference?
They're trying to get Putin to really engage in diplomacy and to call his bluff, to say, if you really say you want diplomacy, then prove it. And that's why Secretary Blinken challenged the Russians at the UN yesterday to meet in Europe next week and talk about their mutual security concerns rather than invading, as the president had just warned right before that UN meeting started, was imminent. So the Russians did accept that offer. They are going to meet with Secretary Blinken back here in Europe. We don't know yet what capital, sometime next week, toward the end of next week. And the main argument from Blinken and all of the other leaders here is there can't be any military action, an invasion, prior to that meeting. If you really say that you're interested in diplomacy, Vladimir Putin, then prove it. And that's going to be the moment of, of truth after this long, drawn-out period where they have said they want diplomacy but have yet to respond seriously to any of the U.S. offers and are still demanding unacceptable demands of NATO. Right now, at this hour, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, debuting here on the world stage. She's had one foreign trip to Paris and another in Central America, in Guatemala. That one did not go very well, as you recall. This is a real test. She's never come to Munich, to the security conference. And this is where, for years, Joe Biden came, as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and then as the vice president. Tony Blinken came as Joe Biden's chief foreign policy advisor. They know all of the leaders here. And this is where NATO and the other European countries are getting together to talk about European security, NATO security. And today, the State Department announced that it is offering $6 billion to Poland in the purchase of Abrams tanks to signal to Russia and to the rest of Europe that the U.S. is really serious about shoring up the NATO countries on Russia's border.
And Andrea, we know that you'll be watching this whole trip for us. Now, Aaron, Ukrainians are marking 8 years since what was called the Revolution of Dignity. This is happening, of course, at the same time we're seeing these tensions. Tell us about what that was and why it's so significant today.
Well, Savannah, 8 years ago, 100 Ukrainians lost their lives in the Maidan protests. And today here in Kyiv, people, dignitaries, activists, people who were there for the protests gathered to remember the lives lost, the sacrifices that have been made, in their view, for this country's independence. We were speaking to one man who was part of those protests. He was at a small ceremony at a church here in the capital, and he told us that he believes that today marks the anniversary of what he views as a wider war with Russia. Take a listen.
Essentially, I think that back then our war with Russia started, and those boys who we are commemorating today are the first victims of this war. And given that, so to speak, hopeless situation, we won. I am sure we will succeed in today's very anxious situation in Ukraine.
For so many Ukrainians that we have been speaking to here, today is a stark reminder of the high price that they have paid and, in their view, continue to pay for independence from Russian influence. Savannah.
Right. Aaron, Andrea, thank you both so very much. We appreciate it.
And now let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi joins us from Tehran. Ali, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. Millions of people have been told to stay at home as one of the most severe storms in decades hits the UK. The storm has triggered a rare red weather warning, the highest level of alert for wind, meaning that there is a danger to life from flying debris. Hundreds of schools have been shut. Travel networks are facing major disruptions, while thousands of properties have been left without power. Forecasters warn that winds could reach up to 90 miles an hour today, causing further damage and disruption. Social unrest continues to grow in Puerto Rico as the cost of living keeps going up while salaries remain stagnant. Emboldened by public school teachers who abandoned the classroom to demand better pensions, protesters are multiplying by workers in many other sectors. Employees are grappling with the soaring prices while getting paid the same salary as they were getting in 2008. Water and electricity bills in Puerto Rico are 60% more expensive than the U.S. average, while groceries cost 18% more than they do on the mainland. And finally, weighing in at a monstrous 289 grams, more than half a pound, an Israeli strawberry has been declared the largest and heaviest on record by Guinness. The official results took about a year to be certified, but the weight turned out to be fruitful. The owner of the strawberry said he jumped up and down in his car and was laughing and singing, and is said to be very happy to be in the Guinness World Records. Apologies for all those terrible puns, but it is a Friday after all.
That's okay. That's my jam.
Yeah,
Ali.
Joe loves it. Yeah. I love it too. It's hilarious. That's pretty funny. It's cute. He was singing and happy. Good for him. Congrats to his berry. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very happy.
Coming up this Black History Month, a new documentary is spotlighting Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War.
Specifically, how African Americans shaped Lincoln's outlook on the war. One of the experts from the film joins us next with what they've learned.
Plus, a lot of schools are using this month to go more in depth on Black history, but how are they doing it? The new political pressure teachers are facing when talking about racism in the classroom.
For anyone who's watched Netflix's latest hit documentary, it may come as no surprise that the Tinder Swindler himself is looking to cash in on his newfound infamy. Simon Leviev is accused of conning women he met on Tinder into loaning him millions of dollars. He's not faced any criminal charges for allegations made in the Netflix doc, though he has served time for previous fraud charges. Now he may be looking to get his own dating show and dating advice podcast. And E! News is reporting he has an agent, reality star manager Gina Rodriguez. She also represents Mama June and Honey Boo Boo. It's based on information E! News says it received from a source. Well, those concepts are in the works. Leviev is already using his notoriety for cash in a smaller way. He's selling personalized video messages on Cameo for $200 each. So someone who has everything, there's a potential gift idea. I don't know.
Yeah, from what are we calling him? Con artist?
Great. Alleged.
You'd allege, exactly. And actually, our viewers may remember we had the director of that documentary on. It was a fascinating conversation and really cool documentary. Thank you so much, Joe. Now, a new 4-part docuseries is re-examining the legacy of President Abraham Lincoln and his role in the emancipation of slaves during the Civil War. Some of the biggest Lincoln scholars came together to give new perspectives on the president, including how influential African Americans were in shaping his outlook on the war and the future of America. Here's a look at Lincoln's dilemma.
What we're seeing today is dramatic evidence of what happens when you fail to talk honestly about your history. And it harkens to the mid-19th century during the Civil War. So Lincoln becomes important to reflect on the issues of division that we're seeing today.
Kelly Carter-Jackson is featured in the film and joins us now for more. She's an associate professor in the Department of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. Kelly's also the author of Force and Freedom. Kelly, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this film. It looks amazing, this series here. So it looks at how Lincoln confronted slavery in the U.S. during the Civil War, but it also examines how Lincoln didn't really set out to do that. Walk us through what some of the misconceptions are that we learn about in this movie, and how does it and how should it impact how we talk about Lincoln today?
Yeah, Lincoln is probably one of our most complicated presidents. And it's interesting, when the Civil War starts, Lincoln's #1 goal is reunification. He wants to bring the South back into the country again. And if he can do it by keeping the institution of slavery, he will. And later he finds out that in order to do it, he has to get rid of the institution of slavery. And so he does. But it's not without great encouragement and great persuasion from people like Frederick Douglass and people on the ground and the enslaved people themselves, who are basically forcing his hand when it comes to the issue of abolition.
Yeah, so you just mentioned someone I want to ask you about, which first, of course, the film makes sure to bring attention to the risk African Americans took themselves to fight for the end of slavery, but also, as you just mentioned, the influence of Frederick Douglass. How did this change Lincoln's perspective? Tell us a little bit about what you do uncover in this, and why is it important that we do talk about those risks more when we talk about Lincoln and emancipation?
I mean, it's so important that we talk about Frederick Douglass. It's so important that we talk about enslaved people themselves when we look at this moment. Because for one, Frederick Douglass is really responsible for a lot of Abraham Lincoln's success. You know, everything that we can think of when it comes to the Emancipation Proclamation, when it comes to letting Black soldiers fight, that was Douglass's idea. When it came to paying Black soldiers the same as white soldiers, that was also Douglass's idea. Douglass also pushes back on this idea of colonization or sending free Black people, you know, back to Africa or to Haiti. And it's enslaved people on the ground that have to do all of the running. They have to get to Union lines. They have to flee on their own. And so it's Black people and Frederick Douglass and key Black leadership and key white allies that are holding Lincoln accountable. And what's so great about Lincoln is that he listens to them. He listens to them and he takes their counsel.
Absolutely. You know, Kelly, this is coming at this time when we're seeing such a debate over teaching race in the classroom, conversations about our history and how it's taught. This series is, of course, sort of a re-examination of that history that many of us have been taught. Why is it important that we do keep teaching history like this, we keep investigating history like this, and keep updating our understanding of race in America and just what's happened in this country?
You know, it's so important. I tell all my students, you can't understand the present until you understand the past. The past is really a roadmap or a blueprint for how we understand not just where we are, but where we might go. And I think right now people are terrified that we might be on the brink of another civil war when you think of all of the political and the social unrest. And so if we can look back on the past and say, okay, here's what we did that was not so great. Here's what we did that was really, really wonderful. And try to take that path of what is good and wonderful and a democracy that works for all. I think there's some real special lessons to be learned in this documentary.
Kelly Carter-Jackson, there sure are. Congratulations on it. Really amazing series, fascinating and so important. Thank you for your time this morning. We so appreciate it. And Lincoln's Dilemma is available to stream on Apple TV Plus starting today.
More states are introducing legislation to limit how race is taught in the classroom, and many teachers now feel they're caught in the political crossfire. That frustration is causing some to quit their jobs altogether. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett spoke with one teacher who calls the new restrictions demoralizing.
Outrage over a teacher in Massachusetts making toddlers wear blackface masks. And parents in Indiana upset after they say a teacher had students draw Black people picking cotton.
Picking cotton was forced labor. It's not something it's not a part of our heritage. There's so many other things that could have been discussed. Inventors, business owners.
Just a few instances of questionable choices on how to teach about Black History Month in schools.
Racism has gone on far too long. we know it's not going to go anywhere. It does not belong in Lawrence Township schools or any school district.
In Massachusetts, the teacher was fired, and the school district in Indiana says the assignment demonstrates poor judgment. While these two states don't have rules on how race and its history in the U.S. can be taught, in the last year, 37 states have introduced measures to limit how race and discrimination can be taught in public schools. 14 states have imposed laws or rules to enforce those restrictions.
It's just demoralizing. I don't feel trusted. I don't feel like they respect the profession.
Like in Iowa, where Tyler Stewart teaches middle school history and government. The state's law limits how teachers can discuss race and gender in the classroom, and conservative lawmakers also recently introduced bills that would require cameras to be installed in classrooms and state control over social studies lesson plans. Because of this, Stewart decided he won't be teaching in Iowa next year.
The constant attacks and the misinformation campaign around COVID, and then when they started trickling in the critical race theory stuff and camera, like everything kind of started to pile on. And then it just kind of hit me as I don't have to keep doing this. I don't. Honestly, I could go somewhere else and make more money and not have to worry about being the center of an attack by our government and by our governor.
Scholars who believe learning accurate history informs our present and future see these limitations as suppression.
What that does is it tells us that there's only one way to be a citizen in this country. There's only one truth.
For the future education and the future of the country and like students that are going to grow up and be part of society, what implications do you see in this for the future of these students?
I think we are going to see a more hyper-visible resurgence, even if it's slow, of the things that we're saying we shouldn't teach about, like racism. What policies like this does is it emboldens people to sort of continue or sort of ratchet up, if you will, further instances of racism and sort of repression, because it's like, well, we can't talk about it, right? But that doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Now, the big picture concern here is the extent at which history could repeat itself when it comes to racism in America, given what we're seeing in classrooms right now. Professor Coles teaches at UMass Amherst, and he told me about an incident just last fall where an anonymous white student group sent out emails with anti-Black rhetoric to Black student groups on campus, telling them they didn't deserve to be there, that they were only there because of affirmative action. These are educated college students that this is happening with. And then you cut to Tyler teaching in a middle school in Iowa where he's hearing students drop the N-word without realizing its severity. And so it's examples like this as to why teachers are frustrated about what they can and can't teach in the classroom because it's going to have bigger picture implications moving forward. They say politics like this does not have a place in their classrooms.
Maura, thank you so much.
And coming up, some of the country's priceless artifacts are now at risk because of climate change.
How this growing crisis is impacting museums and what's being done to protect these items. Next.
We talk a lot about climate change on this show, but here's a consequence of our warming environment you might not know about. Museums and their thousands of invaluable, irreplaceable artifacts are being impacted, and in some cases, there's a risk of losing them forever.
From increased flooding to more frequent wildfires, museums are racing to fortify pieces of history. CNBC correspondent Diana Olick joins us now with more on what's being done to protect them and what more lies ahead in part of her continuing series on the rising risks from climate change. Diana, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, climate change is hitting real estate especially hard, of course. And with museums, it's not just the buildings, but that invaluable amount of history inside.
Several stories below the Smithsonian's Museum of American History, in the bowels of the building, lie the front lines in the fight to save the nation's irreplaceable artifacts from climate change.
But there's water here already. That's right. And there's no rain for weeks. No, but that's groundwater.
As director of Smithsonian Facilities, Nancy Bechtel is responsible for 13 million square feet of museum space, most on the Mall in Washington, D.C., which is below sea level, as well as 2 museums in New York City and 1 in Virginia.
We're always sort of pre-planning and sort of staging different emergency responses just to be prepared so that our staff is prepared and that we have the planning in place.
Worse than rising water is heavier rainfall, which seeped into Smithsonian spaces after a major storm in 2006 and again last spring.
We had probably about 18 inches to 2 feet of water in this cafeteria. Wow.
In fiscal 2021, the Smithsonian had a $214 million budget, and Bechtel is using as much as she can for protection. From putting up flood walls around buildings to rain gardens, sandbags, elevated backup generators.
And I'm going to raise it as high as I can.
To a whole new storage facility on higher ground in Maryland, expected to break ground this year.
Even if I have to protect with plastic, I will protect with plastic.
So you're saving history.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And Bechtel is not alone in the fight. New waterside museums in Miami and St. Petersburg, Florida, were built with special flood protections, and private funding is slowly starting to step up to protect older structures. The Helen Frankenthaler Foundation committed $5 million over the next 2 to 3 years to invest in clean energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilience.
We got 110 applications. That was with just 6 weeks of notice. That 110 applications came in with people knowing exactly what to do and how they wanted to approach it.
So the foundation recently doubled it to $10 million. Now the largest private investment in climate resilience for museums and twice the funding of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
No, it's not enough.
But it helped the California Indian Museum implement wildfire protections for its structure, energy systems, and air filtration. This after the Getty Museum came dangerously close to destruction in the 2019 fires around LA and Malibu.
These collections do not depreciate over time. Guarding and protecting them for a long horizon into the future adds to their value to the museum and to the investors.
And that is why it is impossible to put a dollar figure on this risk because it rises by the minute. Sutton noted that while art investors seem happy to outbid each other for the works, they're not investing nearly enough to protect those works. There are roughly 35,000 museums in America alone. Many of them are working to lower their climate footprints and become more energy efficient, but becoming more resilient against the effects of climate change is a much bigger investment, Joe.
Fascinating story, Diana. Thank
Really
you so much.
is.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great look there. All right, time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day, why they matter to you.
Silvana Henao is with us. Silvana, good morning.
Hey guys, good morning and happy Friday. Shake Shack is the latest chain to announce it's raising prices. The company reporting disappointing earnings as the Omicron variant kept diners away in January and led to some locations being closed temporarily. Shake Shack is also dealing with higher paper, food, and labor costs. It plans to raise prices by at least 3% in March. Shake Shack will also put a 15% premium on third-party delivery orders. Here's a friendly reminder, Amazon Prime is raising prices for new customers starting today. It's the first increase for the service in 4 years. The annual fee is going from $119 to $139 or $14.99 a month. The cost of the Prime Students membership will also go up from $649 to $749 per month. Current Prime subscribers will see the same price hikes on March 26th. And Snapchat will roll out a much-requested feature next week, the ability to change your username. You'll be able to switch your handle without having to set up a new account or start all over again with your friends list, memories, Snap score, and so on. However, you'll only be able to change your name once a year. Snapchat says people grow and change over time, and many probably don't want to be stuck with a bad username they came up with when they were a teen or young adult. Guys?
Yeah, that makes sense. Think about your, did you use Instant Messenger, AIM? Yes. I don't actually remember what my name was, but I know I wouldn't want to say it now if I did.
And I bet whoever does have Jane Doe really does want to keep that.
Jane Doe's ready for a new name.
That's really precious. All right. Thanks, Silvana.
You got it, guys.
Coming up, an Afghan refugee who became an international soccer star is now taking on a challenge off the field.
How she says soccer changed her life and got her away from Taliban control after the break.
We're ending this hour with a story of resilience from one of soccer's biggest superstars. Just 11 years old, Nadia Nadim escaped the Taliban and fled to Denmark, where she learned to play the sport.
She's inspired thousands with her journey, which doesn't end on the soccer field. NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas has more on what Nadim's been doing, and a hint, the uniform includes a white coat.
International soccer superstar Nadia Nadim is known around the globe for doing this. Her Her skills have made her a force in women's professional soccer, but her life story is even more epic. At 11 years old, Nadim fled Afghanistan after her father, an Afghan National Army general, was executed by the Taliban.
We got, smuggled out of the country through, a long route through fake passports behind a truck, and somehow ended up in a refugee camp in Denmark.
There, she was introduced to soccer for the first time.
It was love at first sight. I had one of those moments where my eyes were popping out, my heart was pumping.
From then on, it was an all-out sprint towards becoming a player not only Afghanistan cheered on, but the world wanted to watch. At 34 years old, Nadim has 200 goals to her name and an incredible 98 appearances for her adopted country of Denmark. A champion on 2 continents, winning a National Women's Soccer League championship in Portland in 2017 and the 2021 French League title in Paris. She most recently joined Racing Louisville FC for their inaugural season. Scoring 3 goals and notching 1 assist in 8 games before tearing her ACL. And while you may think doing all of that, plus learning 9 languages, would be enough for Nadim, there was one more goal she was aiming for: becoming a doctor.
I play soccer or football for myself. It's my hobby. I enjoy it, but I wanted to do something more than that.
So she started medical school, studying to become a reconstructive surgeon. The journey to get there? Grueling. Nadim waking up to study before practice and after training, heading to internships at the hospital.
I did ask myself the question, why am I doing this? What's the point,
But Nadim never giving up over the last 10 years, graduating just last month and swapping her jersey for a lab coat.
I felt like med school and being a doctor probably was my calling.
Her club celebrating her accomplishments in the OR, putting together a Dr. Nadim mock jersey.
That's pretty cool. I really want to have one at least, and then we'll see if I play in one or not.
For now, Nadim is focused on getting back on the field after that ACL injury, and one day helping others do the same.
I want to be in a position where you actually are going to have an impact on other people's lives. And I know how much it means when you're in need and someone actually does something for you. It can be anything, just, a little smile or just acknowledging you as a human being.
That jersey is so cool. Dr. Nadim, amazing story. Thanks to Tom Yamas for that report.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.